Phil's involvement with wetland management and the study of migratory birds, that started in 1960 when he worked under Dr. Luke Hoffman, who is pretty much considered the father of the Ramsar Convention on wetlands, and that was in the Camargue in the south of France. He was involved in the MAR conference in 1962, which called for an international convention on wetlands, following concern that with the rapidity with which large areas of wetlands in Europe were being impacted. So this led to the birth of Ramsar. Phil left France to work at the Edward Gray Institute of Field Ornithology in Oxford, and then he soon travelled to Australia, where he worked for the Department of Zoology at Queensland University for 5 years, then the Research Department of New South Wales Fisheries, followed by the New South Wales Parks and Wildlife Service. So he's had a very varied background, lots of interesting places to work there. In 1992, he formed his own company. So he's worked in the design, construction and management of wetlands with that company in both Australia and also in Asia. In 1996, he convened a symposium which led to the launch of the East Asian Australasian Shorebird Reserve Network, and subsequently 8 countries recognising 19 wetland sites that were critical to the survival of these migratory species. Phil is the Australasian Water Studies Group's East Asian Australasian Flyway Partnership Liaison Officer, that's a mouthful, and is now working with the CEPA working group of the EAAFP. So without any further delay, I'd like to welcome Phil to this webinar and hope that you take away many learnings from this event. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Well, this is the image of the Ramsar site and also the aquatic reserve, which is all important. And this is the location, and just give you an idea of that. But debate, so perhaps we can go on from the next one, Liz. Okay, this is a part of a report I did for the local land services some time ago, and it's showing all the roost sites in Botany Bay at that time in 1984, which is somewhat different from now. The Towra Spit image, which you can see there, there's now it's changed as an island, and lots of other things have happened in the meantime. So there's been a lot of changes. So we've found that, just go on to the next one, yeah, and that's as the situation now. The actually I'll go on. This is Botany Bay at the moment. It doesn't show up the lesser number of sites there, but I wasn't able to update this before. So we'll just go on because I've got some interesting pictures to follow through. So the next one. Now this is the elephant's trunk, as it was called at that stage. It was where the most important roosting site for migratory shorebirds. It was a nesting site for little terns, and this was in 1984, just at the time when it was going to be listed as a Ramsar site, just coincidentally, and we tried to get this this part stabilized as it broke off. You'll see what happens next when they go along, and we got a contract from Federal Airports Corporation to do this, but the EIS for this, which is went through the ports, so the Maritime Services Board, was unsuccessful, and we weren't able to do a compromise on that, so that failed in that respect. But anyway, we'll see what's happening next. So next slide is this was predicted to happen, that the Towra Spit was going to break away as an island, and that was reported by the Australian Literature Society in 1973 in a report to the Commonwealth Government. So we tried to stop it from doing that, and it's as predicted, it's moving in a westerly direction. It's been moving at 20 meters a year, and this is in 2001. You can see how far it's moved from where it was, the red writing there, which is still the elephant's trunk or Towra Spit, and you can see Carter's Shoals to the left down there, and that's where we predicted it was going to go. I thought it would either go on and merge with the Carter's Shoals, or it would disintegrate, or it would continue on towards the mouth of the Cooks River. The next one shows us the next progress from that. And you see it's already moved, as we predicted. It's now headed down to Carter Shoals, which is just below the island now. It's a long, skinny thing now, with a bit of vegetation in the middle of the sort of a boomerang shape. So it's been a huge change over that time, and it's merging with Carter Shoals and becoming elongate. But we're fortunate that it's moved that far, but you'll see by the next slide where it actually, that's where it is now 5 years later, and it's still part of the Carter Shoals. The island is still attracting quite a few migratory shorebirds and everything else, but we've got to look at to see how we can stabilize that without compromising the whole thing, because it's all to do with hydraulics and everything else. But it's been stuck there for 5 years, and it's still working, and that's our major site. Okay, just go on to the next one. And we did look at it before at all those. So there's 3 sites, there's 3 species that were part of this project, and these were 3 sites where, as you'll see later on, was presented as part of the Ramsar notification of the concerns in Botany Bay, and the pied oystercatcher, the eastern curlew, and the little tern were 3 species that were listed particularly at that stage. Just going to the next one. Pied oystercatchers, as you see from the graphs that go along, has actually been quite incredible. There's not all that many pairs that nest in Botany Bay, but this was a study, another study I was involved with, which compares with the Hunter Estuary, which is HE, and the blue lines at the background. And the pied oystercatcher has actually been increasing. You see, in 2002, there's less than 40 birds at Towra Point, and you can see this is now going up, and it's fluctuated around 100 or 100 plus now. Since this one, 2016, we have at least 100 and perhaps sometimes a bit more in the bay. So we can't really explain that because it can't be. We don't think it's just from the recruitment from the birds that are nesting in Botany Bay. So whether we've got recruitment from elsewhere or not, but anyway, it's a good outcome because it's one of the main species that we wanted to improve the situation for them as part of the offsets for the concern of the loss of birds in Botany Bay. And the next one is, and you see this is right up to date, how they fluctuates over the time for different years. But if the average out, we have gone over the 100 mark now, and that's what we've still got. So in 1972, I think it was 1 pair in Botany Bay, and we've come a long way since that. So we can't explain all of that, but it's at least been successful. There's probably a lot to do with the fox baiting done by Parks and Wildlife Service to protect their eggs and such like and young. So so that's a good news story from that particular species point of view. And the next one is the eastern curlew. Eastern curlew is globally now listed as critically endangered. And it was one of the species of particular concern. We were very concerned about what was going to happen in Botany Bay at Towra Point Ramsar site in particular. Okay, from the next one on from that, I think we've got some charts on this one. And this is also, if you look at the red line, which is Botany Bay, the population, as you'll see later on, was about 250 birds in the bay, and over the years it's declined, but it's settled down again at 100 birds, and that's been like that for for 20 odd years. So that's still a good thing, and provided we can retain that roosting island, which I pointed out, we've got a fair bit of work to do there, but I'll explain that. But there's some issues there. That's again comparing with the Hunter Estuary, which is the most important site for migratory shorebirds in New South Wales. So we're doing well there because they're losing because of various changes in morphology and everything else of the Hunter Estuary. But that's another species that we're being able to hold. And the left graph there gives you a clearer view of a pretty constant line of counts. Next one. And that's just again just a simple event right up to give us right up to the date 223. But we haven't got the last count there, but you'll see that the dips in between, of course, is when the birds are not here. They migrate, as you would have seen on the last presentation. They fly up to the Arctic and are there for 4 months of the year, and the first 6 or 7 months of the year they're with us because they're here for their non-breeding season, which is very short. It's only about 4 months in the Arctic, with about 6 or 7 months with us. So that's still a pretty good outcome for what's happened so far. And we've just got to try to maintain this, but I'll go into that a bit later. So the next slide, Liz. Now, little tern is somewhat different. That's a nesting bird. It breeds. It comes down from Japan and other parts of the. It doesn't go right up like the. A lot of our shorebirds go up to the high Arctic. This one is lower down, and another population actually breeds where these birds come from, and they come down here as non-breeding birds. So we get a bit of a mixture, together in the same flock sometimes, and it's a bit confusing to many people. But we've had a problem where the island originated from Towra Spit, the elephant's trunk at Towra Spit, rather. Sorry, but that's changed, and we've got a fair bit of disturbance there. We've got a very small nesting area, and in the last couple of years or so, they've not been nesting on Spit Island. They were doing that, but because of the shape and change of the shape and the size of it, their areas reduced. So we're not getting particularly large numbers of little terns, so that's one species of concern that we can still work on. I've got some proposals which you'll see a bit later on in this presentation about providing somewhere for them to nest as well. So we'll go on, and that's just you see some very big peaks, and when they first arrive, if they're going to be successful, if the bigger the flocks that come in to nest, the better chance they have, because the more birds there are to protect them from predators such as silver gulls and ravens, such like, there's enough birds to drive away those predators. So if you have enough space for them to breed and they're smaller colonies, well, then they are more susceptible to predation by mainly avian predators rather than terrestrial predators, such as the pied oystercatcher would be more susceptible to foxes and such like. So as I've just gone over what the text was over there. So the next one, Liz. Okay, this is just the situation in 1993 as far as national and internationally significant populations of migratory shorebirds in Botany Bay. In 93, we had 250 eastern curlew, which, as you know, now is reduced right down to 100. But compared with other areas, we're still doing reasonably well there, even though and that's the international of importance, sites of importance is 210. So at that stage we were above that, and as you can see, 2023 is down to 100 plus. Pacific golden plover is a bit of a sad story for Botany Bay. Compared with the hunter, we've got 0 in the bay itself, but we do get some of a place called Boat Harbour, which is a rock platform outside of Botany Bay, but we can't count that as part of the Ramsar site because that's a different little population, even though very close. Lesser sand plovers, a threatened species, and initially there was a couple of hundred in the bay. That was of national importance and a bit below the international importance. But we haven't had a lesser sand plover at all in Botany Bay or Boat Harbour in recent years. Ruddy turnstone was downlisted. Some of these birds were actually, they did include Boat Harbour in the counts for Botany Bay, which is a bit disjointed, a bit difficult, but we've got one sighting in Botany Bay, but we've got probably about 20 of them at Boat Harbour, which is just outside. Same with the golden plover. We've got about 20 odd birds that go to Boat Harbour on the rock platform, but not coming into the bay. Okay, next slide. Okay, now this is back in 2012 when the results of all our monitoring, we've been monitoring now for since the Ramsar site was listed, and we've found that going on the data that we've collected over that time, they examined these the trends and found that the number of birds declined so low from the time it was listed. It's what we call past its limits of acceptable change for the original values of the Ramsar site in 1984. So this was brought up at the Ramsar COP, and they had that stage that the World Wetland Network coincidentally happened to award some Wetland Globe Awards. A blue globe is one of a pristine site and looking very well, and a grey globe, which is one of concern. Towra Point was awarded a grey globe because of the declines of that time from our data, and then we had to look at that situation again, and I'll talk about it later on. There had to be the Australian government had to come up with ask the New South Wales government to come with a response strategy, what they want to do about these declines, and that's I will explain that a bit later on, but it's not a lot of good news from that point of view. So as I say, the limits of acceptable change, as you see there, was exceeded, and the New South Wales government had to come up with a response strategy, which I'll come through a bit later on. So it's basically on count data, and also as far as the Ramsar site is concerned, one of the biggest concerns was an increase in mangroves by 34%, but a big decrease in salt marsh. This is quite significant because salt marsh is very important habitat for the golden plovers, which are basically disappeared, and some of the other birds that used to use that for roosting, and the sharp-tailed sandpipers actually used to use it for feeding as well. So those were some other of the things that have changed. Part of those changes in the management of the bay, or not sort of management, sorry, the effect of all of the dredging and such like, which we probably talked about earlier in the previous presentation, causing changes in hydrology and everything else, and erosion and wave action on the southern part of the Botany Bay. Next slide. Okay, this is one thing that I did in Botany Bay as a side. This was a sand quarry on the southeast part of Botany Bay called that unimaginatively as H1 site, which is now called the Willoware Shorebird Lagoon, which you'll see in a moment why it's called that. But that's I was asked to look for an offset site for the RTA at the time for an impact they had on another wetland, and I selected this site, much bigger than the one that's been impacted on, and to do something with that to create habitat. So the next one shows this is the plan. So from just a plain lake, 10 meters deep, with a couple of islands on it, we've actually created on the top side there some intertidal mudflats, which you'll see a better picture of it later on. And the bottom right-hand side is where, because this was a freshwater deep lake, 10 meters deep, and we connected it to a channel on the southeast bottom right-hand corner of the bay, of the lagoon, sorry, to allow seawater to come in and change it to a brackish situation with tidal changes to make it the mudflats there exposed and on the low tide and covered at high tide, as they would do in a much bigger bottom bay situation. So I think that's one of the things. You'll see some images later on about the impact of tall vegetation, and on the north side there, there are a lot of tall casuarinas trees was actually built by the people doing the quarrying of sand and that, and but yeah, you'll see that situation has changed somewhat, but even for the worse. But anyway, we've got that right on the shore itself. It's free from tall vegetation, but we've during the process of here, we actually removed a lot of the mangroves, casuarinas, which is very tall on the shore. We actually removed quite a few of those in the process of creating this habitat as you see it at the moment. And also mangroves started growing there, because once we let the seawater in, mangrove seedlings came in through the weir and started growing everywhere, because when it was fresh, there's just reeds around the outside, and they died when the salt water was allowed, so that killed them and created some mudflats. But there was a plan of management for this. Actually, this time it was under the Department of Planning, so we were able to do this, and there was lots of other things we could do there, but once we got to this stage, the Department of Planning decided they didn't want to retain the land anymore, and it was included into the Towra Point Nature Reserve, and therefore the Ramsar site. Anyway, we'll go on the next slide. Here's the weir that I put in to hopefully keep out most of the mangrove seedlings coming in from the left, from to the channel into the lagoon, which is on the, or the lake, which is on the right. This is remodeling. It's sort of falling in disrepair now because it hasn't been managed because of lack of resources, but that was part of the design as well. So we'll go on beyond that, because what's happening if you don't keep the mangrove seedlings out, you have to manage a different way. So this is now the deep water lake, 10 meters deep. We got some machines in there and laser levelers on bulldozers, and we pushed some of the sand from around the shores, supplemented from other fill material available from council that had surplus material from other dredge operations, and we put all that in there. This is the start of that. Then the next one just goes on to the finishing touches, and you see we've got a pretty large intertidal mudflat, and as you'll see, this is sort of created along the lines of some other work I've done overseas in creating similar sorts of wetlands, and particularly for migratory shorebirds and such like. There's not many of these sort of sites in Australia, if any, and not so many in the flyway either way. So anyway, this was been successfully used in a couple of other countries where I've worked. to create intertidal mudflats, and the islands you saw are still there. You can't see them behind the machines as roost sites. So this is to add some extra habitat to the area to try to make up lost habitat within the bay. Next slide. So this is just afterwards. You see his migratory shorebirds there, and of course the old white ibis always gets a look in as well. So it succeeded in its objective of offsetting the wetland that was being impacted by the RTA. So everyone was happy with that situation. But then, as I say, once it was handed across to the Parks and Wildlife Service, unfortunately, the funding at the time was not sufficient to follow the plan of management, and that's still a thing we're working on with the local land services, who help to do the funding for some of this work now, not the machines and that, but to maintain what we had created. That last picture before, where you see that extended mudflats. Next one. This is what I was talking about. Migratory shorebirds do not like tall vegetation, and this is done from some work many years ago by Wayne Lawler in looking at lots of estuaries in New South Wales, and worked out this is the distance that they like to be away from tall vegetation. The reason for this, they like to have a clear view around them to see potential aerial predators. If they're not, they feel uncomfortable and leave the site. And little terns, when they're nesting, have the same situation. They like to have little bits of vegetation to stabilize around their nest. Little chicks can go and hide in that, but they won't use sites once they become overgrown with mangroves or other tall vegetation. Next slide. Okay, now this is the one I showed you before on the left, and this is today's image from aerial mapping, and you'll see a much fuzzier effect on the North Shore, which is where all the vegetation is now encroached across onto the shorelines, including tall casuarinas, and this one is mangroves as well. So there's a whole lot of area there which has since been cleared, and that's going to be cleared on a regular basis there. But and so we've lost a lot of the open aspect for migratory shorebirds, so the numbers of birds have really dropped off at that site, and we're currently working on that process now. This year we're now between the birds away on the breeding ground, so this is the time to get in there and do some work so we're not disturbing the birds. So there's quite a lot of work to do, and this is where we're at this stage. Next. So a lot of the work is done. You see the top right hand picture there, it's a bit reminiscent of the the machines I had in the Woolooware Shorebird Lagoon, and there's work done in 1965 where we were doing everything with a wheelbarrow and a shovel. Occasionally get a little machine in there, but it was all hard work, and an island in that middle bottom right middle corner middle image on the right was creating islands using sugar bags and rocks and gravel and that to keep it clear of vegetation. And the bottom right hand is the famous now famous wader scrape in the UK at a place called Minsmere, and it's still a famous site now, and it's much bigger and much better managed. The bottom left is the sluice gates were made out of driftwood, and so it was a pretty tough job. The top left-hand corner is also another picture of the wader scrape. Next one. In fact, we used that design in MyPo in Korea, in Hong Kong, and that's been a very successful site as well. It's another very famous site, but we're using similar technology. We've improved a lot of the habitat there as well. So I've got some proposals here. Is to extend the boundaries of the Ramsar site to include existing aquatic reserve, which, as you saw right at the very beginning, where we had the picture of the aquatic reserves and the nature reserve together. One of the important reasons for that is that the island you saw actually moved through that movement outside of the boundary of the nature reserve. So we're pretty keen to retain it. Now it's stopped moving and can work on it, so it's still retained part of the Ramsar site. But the best thing is to include aquatic reserve, which is the values of the aquatic reserve meet the same requirement for Ramsar as for wise use of wetlands, and they're protected from any commercial fishing and everything else. So that would help a lot if we can get that boundary of the Ramsar site. So you've got the nature reserve and the Ramsar site as it is, and the aquatic reserve. That would help immensely. And the other one's still working on the Woolaware shorebird lagoon. We need to remove the damaged weir, undershot weir, and do that. Remove the vegetation that's invaded over the original lagoon, and treat the surface of 2 islands to create suitable habitat for little terns. And they have to be really, they like to use sand with very little on it, some shell grit, but they don't like to be closed in. So that can be done relatively easily, but with some additional funding, because all this costs a lot of money. The monitoring we do is fairly inexpensive, but when you come to this sort of work, and at the moment, as I say, they're clearing the tidal flats again from mangroves, which we're allowed to grow through lack of resources right at the beginning after we did the after it was annexed into the nature reserve. So all these sort of things have been put in place for management plan for ongoing habitat management. Next. Okay. Now, some of the biggest problems we've had is actually getting better communication and cooperation between different government agencies. I don't know if many of you have heard about the Marine Estate Management Authority that came up in 2016, where they say for coastal wetland protection, and all of these agencies are really part of that. We need to work a lot more closely there. When we first had the response strategy, we did have a workshop where a lot of government agencies were brought together, and we came up with the response strategy was a joint effort between quite a few. So we need to work back into that. So really, we want to work very hard now to get all of these agencies together over this next couple of years or so, because everyone's interested in the same sort of habitat. We don't want to sort of compete with fisheries over habitat, because it's the same sort of habitat we want to protect for little birds, for shorebirds and others as well. So that's where we're sort of at, basically. I think we might have another slide there. Yeah. So so the data collected for the Towra Point Ramsar site was critical in its finishing up with a response strategy by the New South Wales government, and that was finalised in 2019. And from that, they found that there is resources for the scale of appropriate management. Key drivers of the change operating at a scale well outside of the control of the site managers. So the site managers have not really been able to, they wouldn't be capable to handle things as they've been going. So that's got to be looked at. But unfortunately, as you'll probably guess, the environment in New South Wales and Australia generally is not at the top of the budgets from governments, and particularly in New South Wales, the Parks and Wildlife Service. So it was recommended that there should be baseline studies and monitoring to elevate the progress of little terns, continue to monitor total numbers of little terns across the summer season, and implemented as the implementers there was suggested it should be the local land services, which is being at the moment, but we're going to work on that with the islands and the lake over this next couple of seasons, well, while they're away at the moment. Migratory shorebirds is to continue monitoring the diversity and populations of migratory bird species at key sites and at any new sites, such as the Curlew Lagoon and anything else we come up with. Again, that's it was suggested that this should be implemented with partners, including the local land services. The review and reporting, the purpose of the response strategy to halt the decline and improve the ecological conditions of the Towra Point Ramsar site as soon as feasible, so that the evidence is available to support the removal of the site from the Article 3.2 of the Ramsar Convention, which it was listed as a site of concern, and it's still that there. And the Australian government particularly does not want it struck off the list as a Ramsar site. So communications with the this all started with communication with the Greater Sydney Local Land Service back in 2017, which led to the conclusion that the ongoing monitoring that we've done for so many years and little terns and part Oystercatcher should continue in the long term to monitor a long-term monitoring program put in place prior to the listing of the site as a wetland of concern. I think that's about it there. Sorry about a bit of a rush. There's quite a few things to cover. So basically, the Ramsar site was gazetted in 1984 as a site of international importance. And because of changes in the bay and the industry, the airports and ports and everything else around there, a lot of changes in all the sites on the northern side have since disappeared. So it's even more important now on the south side at the Ramsar site that we get it right. And we've got a fair bit of work to do, but it's a bit of a battle without large resources, but we're getting there, and some of the things that we've got in line hopefully will retain the birds at the numbers similar to what we've got at the moment.